Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another end-of-season broadcast. Jim Williams here. I'll be with you for the next hour or so, going over all the interesting things that went on this hurricane season. I got to tell you, I've got a lot of mixed emotions about this season we just went through, and I don't know if you guys, any of you out there, read my blog from earlier today that I posted on Twitter and Facebook, but picture yourself as one of the families that have lost a loved one this hurricane season. There has to be probably 300 families at least, maybe more, have lost a loved one this hurricane season. That's a lot of people. Of course, Haiti was the worst hit this hurricane season, and the United States with Matthew affecting the southeast. And that's what we're going to mainly talk about in tonight's show. But we had a lot of things that happened this year. What I'm going to do is mainly tonight I'm going to go over 5 storms. Because we had 15 named storms. I'm going to get to my predictions on that in just a minute. But we had 15 named storms, and really 5 wrapped up this entire hurricane season. There were 5 storms that were the big headliners. And they were Earl, of course, hitting Belize. We had Hermine in the Florida Panhandle. We had Matthew, of course, was the big story of the year. We had Hurricane Nicole hit Bermuda late in the season, and we had recently just Hurricane Otto hitting Nicaragua. So those were the 5 big stories, and that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm going to show you some maps, some statistics, death tolls, and all that kind of stuff tonight. But before we get to that, I want to talk about get some in-house business taken care of here. And again, for those of you that are just joining in, I just played a video recap of the hurricane season, which I thought was pretty neat, showing all the most interesting moments of video this hurricane season as, each area was impacted. There's started out with Earl, and then it started out with video of Mark Sutis Cam in the Big Bend, Florida area from Hermine, and then it showed some video from Matthew, and then showed some video from Nicole in Bermuda and Otto, and then wrapped up with a little logo there at the end of this showing a hurricane flag burning. So if you can watch the archive of this when the show is all over with on our Ustream channel. Anyway, I want to thank you, put a special thanks out to Chris Hollis. He continues to work behind the scenes, keeping Hurricane City going all these years. And believe me, it's been a struggle. But Chris has had my back since, for many, many years, tweaking the site and keeping everything going. So a deep thanks goes out to Chris. And for also maintaining Cane Talk, our message board where people get together and post all their thoughts on the hurricane season as it's ongoing, and sharing ideas and concepts and everything, and predictions and all that kind of stuff. CaneTalk.com. Please check that out. That's a great place to get together with hurricane enthusiasts that like to share ideas. And let's see what else here. I did intercept 2 hurricanes this year, or 2 named storms this year. I was in Tampa for Tropical Storm Cullen, which was kind of an utter disaster because I got there a little bit late. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge was closed. I settled in. I could not get on the north side of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge where the worst conditions were for the Tampa area, so I had to settle into areas around Sarasota and not Sarasota. What was that city I was in again? Fernandina, not Fernandina. Oh my gosh, it's slipping my mind right now. But just south of Tampa Bay, there, right right on the ocean. There is where I was as Cullen was coming in as a tropical storm, and then, of course, later in the season, Hurricane Matthew. I'll get to my decisions on how I ended up in Matthew. I really was not going to be in Matthew unless it hit South Florida. I set up my remote camera. Came home, it never ended up hitting South Florida, so I decided, heck, why not just drive up there and get in the storm? I'm only like 3 or 4 hours away, so why not go for it? So I went up there the morning of the storm and was actually in Hurricane Matthew, and I'll show you some of my footage on that as well. But I got a pet peeve tonight. My predictions, man, I'm telling you, this is the one reason I keep Hurricane City going. And that is my predictions have been outstanding. 14 of the past 16 years, I've nailed at least 2 or more of my top 5 cities to be impacted by a named storm. Now, when I say impacted, that means it could be a brush as much as 70, 80 miles away, or it could be a direct hit from the eye of a hurricane. And it could be a tropical storm or a hurricane. It doesn't differentiate. But what it is these are points on a map. And I've always welcomed people at the beginning of each hurricane season on May 15th when I make my predictions. I always tell people, email me, jim@hurricanecity.com. Blindfold yourself, spin around 3 times in a circle, and play pin the tail on the tracking chart. And see, just pick 3 random locations, okay, 5 random locations. And tell me what cities you picked, email them to me, and we'll see at the end of the hurricane season if you nailed any of them. There are a few people out there that do city or geographic predictions, but they don't narrow it down like I do. Now, there are people like Phil Klotzbach that do regional areas. He'll pick maybe southeast Florida as a higher risk than normal. He'll pick out the Texas coastline, and he'll give you percentages, like small percentages, like there's a 2% chance here and a 1% for South Florida, that kind of thing. And then there are other guys like this guy Dale Link that I've seen him at the hurricane conferences, and he'll pick a circle like South Florida. He'll pick Broward and Palm Beach, and then he'll go up to Louisiana and he'll pick from New Orleans to, say, Cameron, Louisiana or something. And then he'll pick maybe Charleston area or something. But what I do is I will specifically pinpoint a city on the map. I'll give you the map. I'll give you the breakdown of my cities every May 15th. And I'll actually tell you how many named storms there's going to be. This year I said 14 to 16 named storms, give or take. We ended up with 15. I said the Florida Panhandle was going to get hit. We ended up with Hermine hitting just east of Apalachicola. We had, I said that I thought the Outer Banks were going to be impacted this year. Tropical storm Hermine and Matthew, as it was still a hurricane exiting, did affect the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So that's 2 of my top 5. This has happened 14 out of 16 years. Now, the areas that did not get hit were Fort Walton Beach, Florida. That was my number 1. Panama City Beach, Florida, just to the east of there, and Key West. Those areas were not impacted at all this hurricane season. But my track record remains intact. 2 or more of my top 5, 14 of the past 16 years. I even did at the beginning of the kickoff show this year. I retired the chicken suit. I'm not dealing with that anymore. You know, I thought, like, okay, just for amusement purposes, for the audience, just to spice up the shows a little bit, if I'm wrong, if I don't get at least 2 out of my top 5, I'll wear the chicken suit. It's only happened twice. One time I actually wore the hot dog suit. The other time I wore the chicken suit. You can find those on my About page, and those pictures are there. But even on those years that I was wrong, I wasn't off by that much. I mean, the hurricanes made landfall right outside of my top 5 areas, so it wasn't like I was that bad off. But really, honestly, and I got to be serious about this, the people that do predictions really need to start paying attention to my methodology, and I have been harping on this for years. I even went to Phil Klotzbach, and I just laid out as simplistic as this is. And by the way, it's here. This graphic showing, and it's on my predictions page, by the way, hurricanecity.com/predictions. It breaks down each area on how I came to the conclusion of each area that's going to be impacted this hurricane season. So I lay it out in black and white and in detail for people how I come to these conclusions. It's not like I'm just using a plant that's facing a certain direction or just throwing darts at a tracking map. That's not what I do at all. And I've offered this to people in the business to just take a look at it and say, hey, what do you think of this? Is there some merit to it? Can you use it? And I get the eye roll. I get well, it's not a point on a map, and hurricanes they're random. There's no way to look into history and figure out where a system's going to go. I completely disagree with that, because why do you think people like Phil Klotzbach and NOAA even use analog years? Because all an analog year is showing you a particular year in history that had similar patterns to what's going on this hurricane season. And so they say, okay, these past years could maybe, some of the tracks from those past years could match what we see this year. And some of them are right, most of them are wrong. I mean, but look, can we just cut to the bullshit here, okay? NOAA comes out and makes a prediction of 10 to 16 named storms. Now, that's being very vague. That's like saying, let me give you a good analogy. That would be like me saying the Miami Dolphins could go 6-10, or they could go 10-6. Anywhere in between those two extremes is what I'm predicting for the Miami Dolphins this year. That's like, your chances of being wrong are basically very low. And NOAA, for them to go that wide a range, like 10 to 16 named storms, give or take, I mean, come on, you guys, man, that's just terrible. Can't you do better than this? I admit, at least Phil Klotzbach goes, he picks out a number, which I really appreciate. In fact, last few years, my predictions were based on Phil Klotzbach's number of named storms, but this year I decided to go rogue and kind of go off on my own, and it turned out I was dead on with it. Phil Klotzbach predicted 13 named storms. I predicted 15 named storms. Levi Cowan, 10 to 13 named storms. He mentioned that on May 15th. He's the new darling of the internet. Everybody, Levi Cowan said this, and he's going to the MJO, the QBO, the NAO. It's just enough, man. These guys come up with all these reasons why they think something's going to happen, and they haven't been as accurate as I have been. This is a fact. Go back and look. Go back over all my years and look, and you'll see. And I don't get the attention on this that I think it deserves. I really don't. And it's been bothering me for a long time. Bastardi, 11 to 14 named storms. Again, short. He predicted a slower hurricane season, but he focuses on the Northeast every year. Every year, the Northeast is going to get hit. If you keep saying something every year, eventually it's going to come right? CSU, again, Phil Klotzbach, 13 named storms. He was short. It was 15. 15 named storms. I honestly, I just don't know what to say about it anymore. And the fact that these guys really don't mention it, not just in private circles, but publicly, they won't even discuss the fact that cities or picking specific points on a map has relevance. Because here's the thing. If you take data and you take any data, whether it's cancer, whether it's geographic demographics of an area, and the more you narrow down the demographics, the better you can become at figuring out the puzzle of what you're trying to figure out. And basically, when I go city by city by city, it's basically like taking all the stats and putting them under a microscope. It's basically what this comes down to. So you're putting the stats underneath a microscope, and you're finding out, my God, there's actually a pattern here. There's actually something that makes sense. And the proof of it is in the city rankings and the database in and of itself, and figuring out what area gets hit at higher, most likely to be hit at certain times of the year versus other areas. Now, I also had Jamaica at a high risk this year. Came close with Matthew. I mean, they were under a hurricane warning. I'll get to all those specifics when we talk about Matthew, but the big to get off the prediction subject, because it just aggravates me, but I'm going to continue to do it because I've been right. And I said early on, when I started doing this back in 2003, I said, you know what, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to give up on it and just do like the shows I'm doing now. I'm not going to make any mentions of predictions. I'm not going to make, the kickoff show, I'm not going to talk about predictions. I'm just going to talk about what could be expected, what everybody else is saying, which, of course, they're wrong more than they're right. And I don't care what anybody says. There's no good predictor out there at the beginning of the hurricane season. But for Noah to come out and say 10 to 16 name storms, it's a joke, man. It's a joke. At least some of these other guys are willing to step in it a little bit and try to narrow it down where they think these things might go. But you could talk about name storms all you want. You could talk about the H. You could talk about how many hurricanes there are versus tropical storms. Does it all really matter? All that matters is whether your area is going to get hit, right? And when your area gets hit, people may die. This is the risk. This is why we track hurricanes. This is why I track hurricanes. It's why everybody does this, because of the threat to land. If they all went out to sea, nobody would care about it. So it does matter where they go. It does matter. And if you paid attention to my blog today, I really went off on the point about a point on a map. And this is the thing the National Hurricane Center hates. They hate to talk about points on a map. Well, we don't want to pay attention to the center of the storm because it's a point on a map. Well, what if your city is 25 miles away from the center of the hurricane and the hurricane force wind field extends out only 20 miles or 15 miles? We've seen that in numerous occasions where the hurricane force wind field is so small that the area that you live in is right outside that ring of high winds. That is all the difference in the world between one city and another city. That's why it matters. I know the winds can extend out. I know the surge extends out. I know the rainfall, tornadoes, all those side effects of hurricanes expand out way from the center. I get that. But that's not what I'm talking about. Guys, I've lost my screen there for a minute. Sorry about that. Anyways, one more thing I want to talk about, and this is another pet peeve of mine before I get into all the storms this year, and that is the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation. Madden-Julian oscillation. It's this pulse of rising air and moisture that circles the globe, although we don't know if it really circles the globe. It could just be pops up in the Pacific, pops up in the Atlantic, pops up over in the Indian Ocean. I mean, it's a very what's the word I'm looking for? A very ambiguous movement of rising air and rain that when it happens to mysteriously pop up in the Atlantic at the height of the hurricane season, which happens to be around September 10th, all of a sudden we have activity. Everybody goes, oh, the Madden-Julian oscillation. Okay, here's a fact for you. Just about every storm that formed in the Atlantic this year was on a negative MJO. And I've been harping on this on Twitter for years about how the MJO is mostly junk observations, because that's what it means to me. When people say, well, there's a pulse of the MJO moving in, and I know you could argue. There are people that can win this argument and say to me, and David Toleris, him and I have had words, DT Weather Risk. We have had arguments about this in private emails and everything else. Look, yes, if you have a positive MJO and there's a lot of moisture, you can get maybe a more intense hurricane, or maybe you can get maybe 3 or 4 hurricanes at the same time in the Atlantic Basin. If you have a negative MJO, you might have slightly less, but to imply that somehow, to put so much weight into this obscure weather pattern that is ambiguous at best, like you don't know whether it's going to really have an impact. I've seen times when there's been a positive MJO, meaning there's been additional moisture and lift in the Atlantic Basin, and we haven't had anything. Why? Because there's wind shear. And then I've seen other times where despite wind shear, there's been a negative MJO, basically non-existent, and Matthew develops, right? Matthew developed this year in a negative MJO. But yet everybody gets on the internet, the MJO, here's what the Euro says, here's what the GFS says, the European, the Canadian has the MJO pulsing up. Folks, listen. I'm not saying I know everything about the Atlantic Basin, but I've been watching this for a long time. I've been tracking the tropics since high school. That's in the 70s. And I'm telling you, the most important factor in figuring out where, or at least how many named storms there's going to be in a hurricane season, is by far ENSO. The Pacific cooling and warming of the eastern Pacific Oceans are what is the most important factor in the Atlantic hurricane season. Everything else from there trickles down. And that, to me, is the most important factor. So we're going to watch for that going into 2017. Is it going to be a negative ENSO? Are we going to be warm, or are we going to be cooler? Right now, the models seem to indicate we might be like neutral or something at the height of the hurricane season next year, kind of like we were this year. Maybe a similar hurricane season to this past year. But again, it only matters where they're going to go. You can talk numbers all you want. What matters is where are they going. I will continue to dwell on this. People can ignore what I'm doing. They can ignore my work. But when I'm 80 years, if I live to be 80 years old and I'm right 36 out of 40 years, that's something you need to pay attention to. So I'm not happy about this. But I'm going to keep doing it because I think it's the right thing to do. And maybe somebody else that's got some clout with the higher ups in the weather business will start doing the same method, and maybe they'll get some legs on it. And I'm going to tell you something. If Phil Klotzbach had my success in picking cities, he'd be a rock star right now. Even without Dr. Gray, which condolences to Dr. Gray and his family, and even Phil Klotzbach and the people that work with him at Colorado State. Hurricane legend. He passed away before this hurricane season started, but truly a legend. But Phil Klotzbach has this opportunity to start picking areas to be hit, and I'm talking about specific areas, not just general regions. And if he can start nailing this, he will become a rock star. I won't, because I'm just a regular guy. And that's just the way it is. So I wish I had that Tony Montana tape. Say goodbye to the bad guy. But no, seriously, I will keep doing this because I enjoy it. It's a hobby of mine. It can be stressful at times. I've had a lot of ups and downs. I've talked about shutting this thing down several times. But you know what? As long as I keep being right about this, why not? Why not keep it going? I mean, I'm not perfect. Nobody will ever make perfect predictions, but my predictions are pretty damn good. And so I'm not going to stop doing it just because people like to marginalize what I do. So it is what it is. All right, let's get on with our show tonight. Let's start with Hurricane Earl. Now, up until Earl, we had Cullen. Was a newsmaker that was a tropical storm that headed up to Tampa, and I already explained to you what happened. I went to go chase that, and Sunshine Skyway Bridge closed, so it ended up being a big rain event for the Big Bend, Florida area, but there was too much wind shear, and it just never really materialized into much. 65 miles an hour. I did the live video stream is on our Ustream channel. I did not make an archive out of it because there really wasn't much to get out of it, but it's, by the way, that's another thing I wanted to mention, our archive page, hurricanecity.com/video archives. I went back and pulled up all the old archives and put them on that page. It's some pretty interesting stuff. In fact, my very first chase of a hurricane where I actually got in a vehicle and chased it was Hurricane George back in 1998 when it hit Mississippi. I went up there with storm chaser Jeff Gammons, and him and I went up to Pascagoula, Mississippi, and filmed the whole thing. We made this whole video production. It's pretty hysterical. We made this, we made it whole like a storyline, and it it got edited and re-edited. And this was back in the days when there wasn't any video editing software online to download. So you had to use the old-fashioned technique of editing video, and it wasn't very good. So I salvaged out of it what I could and put it up on the video archive page. Unfortunately, all of the archives from 99 through 2002 were on a server at a server farm, and those files have all since been deleted. That was when we were using Real Audio, and basically everything was in audio only. And I had all those files on a computer at one time, but they've all been thrown in the garbage, recycled. Servers have been recycled, and that information got lost. But we've been doing these shows since 1998. I'm sorry, since 1998, and I'll keep going and doing them as long as I can because I kind of enjoy getting in front of the screen here. I don't like writing blogs as much because you have to do too much spell check and everything like that. I really don't like it. But I like to get in front of the camera here and do these shows from time to time. So anyway, let's get on with it. Check that video page out, though. There's a lot of good videos on there, like years and years and years of archives and videos and intercepts and everything. It's really some good stuff on there. By the way, there's even a video on there from the memorial service of Tim Samaras and the guys that died in the Oklahoma tornado. The name of the tornado is slipping my mind, but it reminded me because I saw a video of the Storm Chase anthology by, you know what, I'm terrible with names, so you'll have to excuse me tonight, but his name will come to my mind eventually. He developed a video of Storm Chase anthology, and in fact, I'm going to post it on Twitter probably in the next couple of days because I just love watching that show. It goes all the way from the past way to show Jim Leonard, the years that Jim Leonard was a storm chaser in the plains, and it goes to the modern days of how the guys died in the tornado, and it even interviews people like Ginger Z and some of the people from the Weather Channel and talks about storm chasers and everything. So I really enjoy that video. I'll post it on my Facebook page and on my Twitter page. But anyway, those videos can all be found at my video archive page. So check that out, hurricanecity.com/video archives. All right, let's get to business here, talking about the most important stories of the 2015 Atlantic hurricane season. So I'm going to switch you over to the HurTrack program. Do we have the there we go. Okay. This is the HurTrack program. And we're going to start out with Hurricane Earl. And this was on August 3rd at midnight, or in the afternoon rather. And let's go forward in motion here. And it passes just north of Honduras. And then it approaches Belize City here as a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane. Now, what was interesting about this position where it's in right now is it was really getting its act together rather quickly, and I was debating on whether to do an archive on this or do a live hurricane warning show, but because it was a tropical storm about to become a hurricane, I decided, because we only do coverage on hurricanes in the Caribbean when they're major, and this was a tropical storm just beginning to become a hurricane. But what happened is, right at landfall, this thing really began to wrap up quite nicely. And, had it had a little more time, it hit with 80-mile-per-hour winds, but had it had a little more time, this thing could have easily ramped up into a Category 2. So my notes on Hurricane Earl were that how this could have been much worse was it ran out of real estate. It's as simple as that. I mean, this thing was a tropical storm, but it started to get its act together. It had the high pressure aloft. It had everything going for it. It was nice and circular. And you notice the Aqua wind field, which is tropical storm force winds, were heading into Belize City, and then it hit Belize City right here at 2 a.m. on August 4th. Now, For those of you that have been in nighttime hurricanes, know how this can be pretty dramatic. Now we have a strengthening hurricane hitting landfall in the middle of the night. Two things with this. It's scary. You don't know what's coming at you in the middle of the night, and it was in a strengthening mode. So the winds, when hurricanes are strengthening, the winds tend to mix more down to the surface much more quickly. So I would anticipate, and based on the damage we saw from Belize City, there was probably quite a bit of, I remember there was quite a bit of coastal damage just south of Belize City all the way up to just north of Belize City, and the Corozal area really took a hard hit from this, right along the Median coast. Not necessarily inland areas, but very heavy damage in Belize City. In fact, going back and looking at my notes on Hurricane Earl, now, the thing about, well, I'm going to show you the future track of this, but where the most of the deaths occurred with this was as it passed inland and towards Veracruz, Mexico, and it ended up killing 65 people. This was one of the biggest actually, it was the second biggest death toll this hurricane season from Matthew. Even though there was, I think, somewhere upwards of 50 people that were killed in the United States from Matthew, this was the second most devastated area as far as death toll is concerned in the Atlantic Basin, was from the landfall area from Hurricane Earl. In the Mexican states of Puebla and Veracruz, that's where most of the flooding occurred. The Civil Defense Protection Coordinator, Luis Puente, said that he thought as many as 65 people may have been killed in these areas. In San Pedro town, which is where we're showing the center of the hurricane right on this image you're looking at on the HurTrack program, in Ambergris Caye area, several homes were severely damaged, while along the beach, many businesses and docks were partially or completely destroyed. According to local authorities on Ambergris Caye, the preliminary damage assessment showed significant structural damage and beach erosion. During the hurricane with 80-mile-per-hour winds, 2 houses were reported to have collapsed by the San Mateo area, while 2 fires were reported due to electrical outages and surges. No human loss or injuries have been reported, at least in the Belize area. So let's take a look at what happens now as Hurricane Earl moves inland. This is when it's like a sponge, and it starts to squeeze out all that moisture as a tropical storm, and then it regained a little bit of strength as it got into the Bay of Campeche and headed towards Veracruz, Mexico, where it took most of its lives. So let's run the animation one more time. You see it coming into Belize City, just reaching hurricane strength, well organized, weakens over land, dumping torrents amounts of rain. Then it heads towards Veracruz, and here we have it making landfall as a 55-mile-an-hour, it's actually 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm let me start this again. It starts to head over there at around 2-3 p.m. is when it makes landfall near Veracruz, Mexico, 6-7 p.m., and then it hits at nighttime, 11 p.m. Around midnight, it makes landfall at Veracruz as a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm. And again, this is where most of the damage occurred, and it was mainly due to flooding. And 65 people were killed along the path of Hurricane Earl in early August. So this was the first big story of the 2016 Atlantic hurricane season. All right, now let's open up Hermine, and this was the storm that hit the Florida Panhandle. And let's go ahead and load up Hermine with the HurTrack program. And this was a storm that developed right on the north coast of Cuba, right near Havana, Cuba, started moving west-northwest into the Gulf of Mexico, and then hung a hard right-hand turn and headed up towards the Big Bend, Florida area. So let's go ahead and map this. And let's get it to where it came ashore, which is what we're focusing on tonight mainly, is where the landfall points are of the systems that made landfall this hurricane season. And here we are, Hurricane Hermine. Let's go ahead and animate this. And you can see our system is moving in the southern Gulf of Mexico right now, and then it starts to move through the eastern Gulf of Mexico. You'll see it in a second coming in on your screen. Here we go. Here it comes. And this was on September 1st. It's cruising north in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. It starts to expand its wind field, which we commonly see in the eastern Gulf of Mexico from systems. They often become lopsided, and the main bulk of the tropical storm and or hurricane force winds are on the east side of the circulation. So let's go ahead and run this again and see what happens here. The system is developing on the north coast of Cuba. It goes into the Gulf of Mexico, hangs a hard right-hand turn in advance of a front. Trough picks it up, slings it off to the northeast, and for a while there, I remember some of the models were kind of indicating, even when it was in this position right here, I'm going to stop it. When it was in this position right here, there were even some models indicating that Apalachicola could take a direct hit, that even Panama City Beach could be impacted, and I was a little disappointed, to be honest with you, because I wanted kind of Panama City to be impacted this year because that was in my top 5. So it came close to Panama City, but it ended up not even being a brush for Panama City. It just was too far east of there, and it was a lopsided system to be considered as a brush. But you continue on with the animation, and you can see it passes just east of Apalachicola. Now, at this point, the Weather Channel was there. I remember Jim Cantori was there. They were watching the docks and the water rise and the fall of what was happening there. And Mark Sudduth had his webcam there in the Big Bend, Florida area. And again, if those of you missed it, I played all those videos at the beginning of the show to show you Mark's cam as it was hit by a big dock that broke loose from some kind of a dock walkway kind of a thing that broke loose and hit his remote camera, which was based in Cedar Key, which is right where my mouse pointer is over here, about 78 nautical miles east of where the center made landfall. And hats off to Mark on that, because that was a really outstanding video. Even though it was in the dark, it was still effective because the dock was still lit up, the lights were still on, so you could see everything. It was really an amazing shot. Anyway, this system came ashore right near Panacea, Florida, and came inland as a 80-mile-per-hour hurricane. Now, this was another one of these storms this hurricane season that rapidly intensified right before landfall, and this system had all the makings to, had this begun to get better organized earlier, this system could have very well ramped it into a potential major hurricane because it had the eye was well defined, it had a high pressure aloft. Even though it was a little bit lopsided, it was really getting its act together rather quickly as it approached the Florida Panhandle here. So it was, as it moved into Appalachia Bay, it was really getting its act together, and luckily, as far as I know, nobody was killed in this, but here are some damage reports that came out of the area. Emergency management reported 133 calls for trees on roadways, 115 calls for downed power lines, 49 homes were impacted with flooding at 8 Wakulla businesses. 12 homes were damaged by fallen trees. No injuries were reported, with a 99% power outage reported across the county where it made landfall. Now, down here in Ocala, Florida, just east of Cedar Key in the center of the state, a homeless man was killed by a falling tree, so it did take a life. Hermine did. On St. Mark's, surge flooding inundates the area. That was the area west of where Mark Siddiscam was located from HurricaneTrack.com. The Tallahassee, Florida area, there was over 100,000 without power. I'm sure the students that were studying meteorology at Florida State probably got a good take on this whole thing as Hurricane Hermine moved in there. In the Tampa area, 9 inches of rain and flooding in many areas. You know, the Tampa area, even though they did not get directly impacted this year by the center, the core of a tropical storm, they did get a lot of rain this year from tropical systems, from Cullen and from Hermine, and even from Matthew. I think a little bit of rain got in there. So they did get a lot of rain this year, even though they did not have to deal with the direct core of a tropical storm or a hurricane. Both Hermine and Cullen passed well to the north of Tampa Bay. Alligator Point, which is right near Apalachicola, also reported a 3-foot storm surge. So that was it. Landfall took place on September 2nd, and then it cruised off to the northeast and went through Georgia and rode up through the southeast. And this would set the stage for the flooding that would take place in Hurricane Matthew. Because what happened is that Matthew came along later in the hurricane season, but this area in the southeast, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, were all impacted by, I think we had Julia, we had Hermine, we had Cullen, and we had Matthew. So 4 systems this year affected the southeast, dumping a lot of rain. So naturally, when Matthew came along last, the stage was set for the flooding. But the area was completely saturated this year. And while I'm speaking on the southeast, even though we're not really focusing on Georgia, South Carolina until we get to the Matthew conversation, the flooding that took place in those areas and the amount of named storms that affected them this year is really going to cause some of these areas to move up in my rankings. Areas like Charleston, for example, Savannah, Georgia, they're going to move up quite a few slots in the top 50 because, believe it or not, Savannah, Georgia, even though they don't get hit directly by a lot of hurricanes, they get a lot of the backdoor hurricanes coming from the Gulf of Mexico. So they are, believe it or not, in the top 50 for the amount of for named storm impacts going back to 1871. So those areas in the southeast, a lot of those areas are going to move up maybe as much as 6 to 10 positions in the top 50 when I get that calculated during the offseason. I have to wait for the final NHC reports and all the details on all these systems to make absolutely sure that these were hits versus brushes and all that kind of stuff. But I think some of those cities, Savannah, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina, those areas are all going to move up in the rankings because they were impacted by some areas 3 or 4 named storms this hurricane season. All right, let's go back to the maps. And now our next system we're going to talk about is Hurricane Matthew. This was by far the biggest, most talked about storm of the 2016 Atlantic hurricane season. So let's go ahead and open up Hurricane Matthew with the HurTrack program. And we'll get that fully loaded here. And Matthew, what I'm going to do, I really want to zoom in on the Greater Antilles because they really took the hardest hit from Hurricane Matthew. And let's zoom in on Haiti, Jamaica. Let's tune in on eastern Cuba, the southeast Bahamas. They were all impacted by Hurricane Matthew, and there's the track forecast points from the National Hurricane Center. But let's go ahead and animate the entire past track on this system. And this system developed in a relatively high shear environment well to the south of Jamaica. In fact, it was right off the coast of South America. It was right just north of the ABC Islands. In fact, Matthew did make landfall as a tropical storm in the Windward Islands. It hit a few of the islands, came through there, then began to make its turn and impact the Greater Antilles. So let's go ahead and animate this one more time. And let's go ahead and talk about where it got to in this position right here. And this is when this system was really, really cranking up. And it was upwards of 140 miles an hour. Right at the bottom of your screen, you see it coming into view there with the HurTrack program. You see the expanse of the wind field. Now, the yellow areas are gust to tropical storm. The aqua areas are sustained tropical storm force winds, and the red areas, which you'll see better when I animate it further, are the sustained hurricane force winds. Now, let's talk about Jamaica a little bit, because Jamaica was threatened by Hurricane Matthew. In fact, for days, the models were indicating Jamaica was going to take a hit from this. This includes the GFS. The Euro was a little bit east of Jamaica until the Euro started really shifting towards the Tiburon Peninsula. The Canadian model had it going, believe it or not, the furthest west over western Jamaica. I'm just speaking off my mind here. I don't have notes for the models. I just remember what I saw when the models were being run on this. But Jamaica, for all intents and purposes, was supposed to take on a significant Category 4 hurricane from Matthew. Everybody in Jamaica was ready for this. This was coming. The models were pretty consistent in taking this near Jamaica. There was not really much talk about Haiti when it was down near Colombia and beginning to make the turn. All the talk was Jamaica, Jamaica, Jamaica. And then what happened was the models began to shift. And the talk was this is going to be a Haiti storm. And so a really hysterical video came out at the time that it was appearing that this was going to miss Haiti, and I absolutely love this video, man. This video is so hysterical to me. The video that shows Matthew missing Jamaica, and here it is. This is hysterical.
Tell me that. I said, alright, we have enough problems to deal with right now. Find somewhere else go.
Nothing you can do to stop a hurricane from coming.
Matthew, you for hearing a youth.
What y'all gonna do? Eh? Watch ya. Level up. Watch ya again. Level up. One more time. Level up. Or I better go stack up on bread and mackerel and everything. Pack up on a banana tree them and run them on forward.
Matthew, alright.
Why run come up in
Bumbo.
Yes, man, you never want to hear no, eh? You never want to hear.
Sorry.
How sorry you say?
Yeah,
The bumbo clock cell.
And you want me to do that, man?
Move your mama ass and go somewhere else, man.
You know, see, I hate me mother send me and me take show off, come around here, so.
Move from there. Run way back this time.
Yes, boss. I write up this on me, I'm going. Right up this on me, I'm going. My friend, I don't even know why I come this way, my friend.
All right, man, that video, to me, is so freaking hysterical, man. I just couldn't get over when that video came out. I'm like, this has got to be the funniest freaking thing I've seen, man. I just, level up. And then they show this gun pointing at the hurricane, like, go somewhere else. You'll go somewhere else. It's so stupid, man, but it's so funny. And then I posted, like, apparently all you need is a gun to get rid of these things. Like, who would have known? Like, I mean, just whip out a gun and the hurricane apparently will just go off somewhere else. Like, it should be the poster child for the NRA, man. That was freaking hysterical. But anyway, at that time, you know, the thinking was, well, this is definitely not hitting Jamaica, right? And so all attention was on Haiti, because Haiti, we all know the history. Back in 2012, or was it 2010? 2010. The earthquake, man, just devastating that. I mean, I remember, I just can't get the visual out of my head. And if you want to go watch it, it's on the archive page at Hurricane City. The video of the front-end loaders scooping up the dead bodies and throwing them in the dump truck is just, it makes you, it's more than the brain's able to process. The only thing that came to mind about the Haiti earthquake was Soylent Green, that movie Soylent. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie, but the one with Charlton Heston, where they start using people as food, and the only way they can get the people is they come in with these scoopers and they scoop the people up, but the only difference is those people were alive. These people were dead. I think in some over 100,000 people died in Haiti as a result of that earthquake. So, and they're still recovering to this day. And there are people living in 10 cities. And when Matthew started coming up that way, we were thinking, this is not going to be good. This is just not going to be good. And the difference was, and I wrote in my blog today, between Haiti being hit by Matthew on the Tiburon Peninsula versus coming in a little bit further east. Had it been 40 to 50 miles further east, it would have hit the high-dense population areas that were impacted by the earthquake. Jacmel, Port-au-Prince. Those areas would have been absolutely devastated. Not only that, but it would have traveled up the west coast of Haiti and affected areas like Cap-Haïtien on the north shore. It would have affected Port-Salut on the northwest coast. I'm sorry, Port-Salut. What's that city on the northwest coast? Slipping my mind. I don't do drugs, by the way. My memory is just shot. But anyway, the city on the northwest coast, slipping my mind. It's not Cap-Haïtien. It's where a lot of the wealthy people in the country live. Actually, in the northwest portion of the island, or I say island, the country of Haiti. You know what? I'm not gonna torture myself over this. But point is, these were the highest population areas. 10 million people would have been impacted by Hurricane Matthew, by the hurricane force winds and by the storm surge, had that track shifted just 50 miles further east. But thinking on the devastation from the earthquake, and not to make light of this, but I was watching Family Guy the other night, which is my favorite silly show to watch all the time, and they had this scene where Godzilla comes out of the water and goes toward Haiti and then goes, oh my God, it's so bad here. Let me just back up and go away. Here it is. I just thought you'd want to see this. It's freaking hysterical.
Our path. My God, I had no idea it could be so bad. Ryan, I don't want to act anymore. Good. And we just got to make Peter and Lois understand. Yes, well, if they want to make me into a monster like those people, we'll give them a monster. Like when Godzilla attacks Haiti. Oh my God.
Now that is some funny shit. I'm sorry. But I mean, that's kind of the way that I feel, is that you had all these hundreds of thousands, or at least over 100,000 people dead from that earthquake, and you had this other hurricane coming, and that when I saw that cartoon of Godzilla coming up there, I thought, it's true, man. Like, of all the places on the planet I can think of right now, like, Haiti is probably the worst off. And I mean, it doesn't reflect the entire nation. There are areas that are doing fine in Haiti, but I mean, as a whole, there's a lot of poverty, a lot of people still living in the tent cities, and I'm so thankful, and I literally mean this, and I'm thankful that this thing hit the Tiburon Peninsula versus those other areas. But with that said, you got to figure at least 300 families lost a loved one in Hurricane Matthew. That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. And that's the sad thing about hurricane tracking. You know, we like to track them, the drama, you see them heading toward land, the whole soap opera unfolding. That's why I do this. But when you think about an area that really doesn't have the resources to prepare properly for something like this, and even though they opened up shelters on the Tiburon Peninsula, a lot of people were evacuated, but the area took some really, really hard damage. I showed you again aerial video from that devastation at the beginning of the show tonight, and just to tell you what happened in the Tiburon Peninsula, again, reports over 1,000 dead. Again, we don't know the exact number on that. We may never know. There could be people, because maybe people get buried too quickly or they're unaccounted for. They could have been out of town. A lot of things happen where you don't know the exact numbers, but over 1,000 dead. Tens of thousands of homes destroyed. And as the area was hit by a high storm surge and 140-mile-an-hour winds. Just absolutely unimaginable destruction that took place in the Tiburon Peninsula. Basically from right near Port-au-Prince, just west of Port-au-Prince, all the way through the entire Tiburon Peninsula was devastated. I mean, that's a lot of people. Millions were impacted. And I'm really surprised the death toll wasn't higher. But I'm thankful it was only 1,000, and it could have been much worse had it hit areas further east. All right, so let's go back to the herd track and talk about when it gets near Cuba, because this is another point where we had a lot of devastation. So anyway, here it is. It makes landfall in the Tiburon Peninsula at 7 a.m., so at the very least, when the worst conditions were arriving, it was probably 4 o'clock, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning in western Tiburon Peninsula. And then it started to get light as the eye was passing over. And then it moved away from the Tiburon Peninsula by about 11 a.m. And conditions started to improve down there. And that's when they probably realized the magnitude of the devastation on the Tiburon Peninsula. But then all eyes were going to focus on eastern Cuba. We have Guantanamo up here, just west of Baracuba. We have Manzanillo, Cuba here, which did not get hit, and Nuvitas, Cuba, two huge population centers that were spared. But Baracoa did take a direct hit. So here's what happened. It passes right over Baracoa, and this is around 9 p.m., so it's happening in the middle of the night. Now, another video I showed you at the beginning of the show, and the reason I don't have all these videos queued up is because I plan for them to be used all in once at the beginning of the video, and I don't want to have to go through every single video, and we just don't have enough time to show them all here tonight. In fact, I'm already an hour into the show here tonight. But Baracoa, Cuba took a direct hit in the nighttime hours, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. The eye passes right over Baracoa, Cuba. Now, Mike Dice, storm chaser Mike Dice, was in Baracoa, Cuba, and I remember he was traveling around in East Cuba, and I got to give him so much credit, man. I mean, Mike Dice, I've met Mike Dice a few times. I've interviewed him. His footage is outstanding. He works for National Geographic, and he was there to document this hurricane hitting Baracoa, Cuba, eastern Cuba. And he was there in a room with a bunch of other people that was all, shuttered up and everything. And you could hear the wind howling, and they were holding the doors shut at the height of this hurricane as these winds, at this point the winds were 130 miles per hour inside that red circle there. And they were holding all the doors shut. And in the morning when he went out there, he was filming utter devastation, brick buildings falling to the ground. Now, granted, the infrastructure in Cuba is not the greatest because a lot of the buildings are old and it costs a lot to refurbish them. So a lot of these buildings date back quite a few years, but still they're either concrete or brick or block. Most of these buildings are pretty solid. You have some wood structures, but based on all the video I saw from Mike Dice, was the concrete buildings were crumbled. And a lot of buildings had significant structural damage in Baracoa, Cuba. But there were no fatalities. As far as I know, nobody died in Baracoa, Cuba. And the system would begin to pull away. And then what would happen is as it pulled away, when it got to a point where the tropical storm force winds were beginning to pull away from Baracoa, where it was safe to go outside, and the sun was beginning to rise, that's when they realized the magnitude of the devastation that took place in eastern Cuba. Great Inagua Island, where the Morton Salt Factory is located, did not take a direct hit. That was a brush for Great Inagua Island. And then that sets the tone, the map sets the scene for the Bahamas. So here we were in the Bahamas, and let's go ahead and animate the entire pass track through the Bahamas. And again, the Bahamas are the most hit area, and the Northwest Bahamas was in my top 5 this year. And I had Great Abaco Island, which is up here as one of my top 5, and it was brushed by Hurricane Matthew as it hit Grand Bahama and Nassau and Andros Island. So let's go ahead and animate this one more time. Now, I believe that Jim Eds, Storm Chaser Jim Eds, was on Exuma here, right on the northern portion of Matthew affected the Exumas, but it was not it was a direct hit, but it was not prolonged. As you see, they did get, probably 4 hours of hurricane force winds as it began to pull away from Exuma. But the place to be if you were a hurricane chaser was Nassau, Andros, or Grand Bahama Island. So here's what happened. First, it took a direct hit on the tiny island of Nassau, which is the capital of the Bahamas. That's the highest population center in the Bahamas, Nassau. About 400,000 plus people live there. And they took a direct hit from Hurricane Matthew. Heavy damage all over the island. I had a video queued up from Nassau, but I did not load it tonight. I apologize for that. I don't think I have that. Let me see. No, I don't. I don't have that video queued up. But Nassau, again, took a direct hit from 140 mile an hour winds. And then the next position was on the north tip of Andros Island. Again, this was a 140 mile an hour hurricane. It strengthened after it left Cuba and regained strength as it went through the northwest Bahamas. Northern tip of Andros, and it's been a long time since Andros was affected. In fact, since the late 90s or early 2000s, I believe, was the last time they were affected by a hurricane on Andros Island. And this was the first in a long time. I think it was like 17 years since they had a hurricane at Andros, which is truly amazing considering the Northwest Bahamas are the far most affected area in the entire Atlantic Basin with the outside of Cape Hatteras. But Andros Island was completely devastated. Roofs ripped off. Actually, let me see if I can pull these up because I know I had these images ready. Let me see if I can pull them up here. Position of Hurricane Matthew. This was at 6 p.m. on October 6th with 140 mile per hour winds. And I remember looking at the radar of this and seeing the bands just coming in, rotating time and time again over West End Grand Bahama Island. And that's where the most damage took place on that island. And they were devastated. It's going to be a while before Grand Bahama, Nassau, and Andros recover from this hurricane. But look at the size of the hurricane and the intensity of it. 140 mile an hour winds passing right over the west portion of Grand Bahama Island. Truly devastation in the Bahamas. Now here it was right before it affected Grand Bahama Island, and you can see that the motion is north-northwest. They called it northwest at the time, but I was thinking it was more north-northwest based on the movement because it did do a move kind of north when it went right over Grand Bahama before it went back toward the north-northwest. But at this point, the winds were 140 mile an hour, and look at the population centers in southeast Florida. From Fort Pierce all the way down to South Miami, you have a population of 6 million people that could have been impacted by a Category 3/Category 4 hurricane. This would have been the biggest story since the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season, with New Orleans being devastated and the northern Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and the death toll we saw up there. This would have I don't think it would have rivaled the death toll in southeast Florida, but the devastation from flooding and wind would have been tremendous. It would have been probably, had this hit southeast Florida in these high population areas, excuse me, it would have been probably, the death toll would have probably been, not the death toll, the damage toll would have been probably, I would say, probably $30 billion to $50 billion in damage. Had this come in on southeast Florida, had that red circle came in on southeast Florida, had the center of circulation came in say, Deerfield or Fort Lauderdale, you would have seen a damage total, probably $30 to $50 billion in total damage had this hit southeast Florida. So again, that was my theme for the show and for my blog today and for the end of the season, is how things could have been so much worse. And I'm not talking about from a selfish perspective, because I happen to live in Palm Beach County. I'm just saying, knowing what I know, even though they beefed up the infrastructure down here significantly, had this been a direct hit, it would have been very, very costly, and it may have crippled the insurance industry in the United States had this happened. So very lucky that this did not happen. Anyway, back to the maps from the HurTrack program. So let's go ahead and zoom out, and let's focus on the coast of Florida. And talk about what could have happened along the state. And here we go. We're beginning the animation. And I talked to people in Vero Beach and Melbourne, and they said it really wasn't that bad up there compared to areas further north. So I was a little hesitant in the database to consider Vero Beach and Melbourne as a hit. So for continuity's sake, what I did was I decided to make it Vero Beach as a hit and all areas south of Vero Beach as a brush. And if you look at the red circle, that's hurricane force winds. So again, you look at Melbourne and Cape Canaveral, the western eye wall, which is that fat red circle there, was onshore these locations. In fact, in Cape Canaveral, they measured wind gusts of over 100 miles an hour from Matthew. There were 12 people killed in the state of Florida, by the way, from Hurricane Matthew, and there was a lot of coastal erosion and surge damage as this moved right off the coast. And when this hurricane was in this position right here, I realized, well, actually, it was a little further north than this. I think it was right around this position. Let me go forward in time here. Yeah, no, it was actually back down here. I think it actually was that position. Let me get back to that position again. And I'm going to kind of give you the timeline of events as they happened, because I was in this storm, and right when it was here, when it was right near Melbourne, this was at 5 a.m. on October 7th, and the winds were 120 miles per hour at this point. And I was on the phone with Bill Phillips, my co-host for the hurricane warning shows, and I was kind of talking to him and saying, I really need to get up there and intercept this thing, because it's not hitting South Florida, obviously. It looked like it was going to hit South Florida for a while. At least there was a chance that the hurricane force winds could hit Palm Beach County, so I really needed to stay put, be here with my wife, protect the house and property. But it turned out when I woke up in the morning, it was not going to hit here, and I thought, you know what, why not get up there and get video of this thing? Now, I had already went up to New Smyrna Beach and delivered and installed my remote webcam up there. So I was planning on going back up and getting this after the devastation occurred in North Florida from Hurricane Matthew. Well, it turned out that when I woke up in the morning, I actually had enough time to get up there and film this thing. So I got in the truck, loaded everything up, didn't have my instruments working, so I left them behind. But I got there, and just in the nick of time, here comes Hurricane Matthew, and there it was, right off the coast of New Smyrna Beach. And at this point, it had 120 mile per hour winds, Category 3. And notice the red circle was right over New Smyrna Beach. And I was there, and I took some clips, and I wanted to show you what I was able to film while I was there. It starts out with the remote camera. And by the way, I'll stop it from a time during the video to explain what I was doing and what the situation was. But anyway, here it is. Wow. Okay, now this is me this was me driving into town, and what I did is I went over the bridge. I came into New Smyrna off of I-95. That drive, I got to tell you something. That drive down I-95 was brutal. I don't really recommend, and it's dangerous to go intercept a hurricane when the hurricane force winds are already there. Like, you generally like to be there in advance of the hurricane and then kind of hunker down and wait for it to get into the right position to hunker down. I didn't have that opportunity. I just had to plow through this thing to get there. But those winds on I-95 were easily over hurricane force. There were tree limbs flying across the road. There was branches in the road. I even saw a dead alligator on the side of the road. I mean, it was ridiculous, man, some of the stuff I was seeing on I-95. And I was on the phone with Bill the whole time, and I don't know if even he could understand. And I even said to him at the time, I go, if you were in the truck with me right now, dude, you'd be freaking out. Like, this is bad. So I'm pushing into the wind. Remember, the winds are coming down at me because I'm driving north into these winds. So I have north winds hitting me. And there's just debris everywhere. It's bad, but it's driving. I slowed down to like 40 miles an hour. I was driving on I-95. There were no other cars on the road at all. So I get into New Smyrna Beach, and I start heading east. And it's like, okay, there's everything's closed, obviously. The first place I pull into is a shopping center, and there's just tree limbs everywhere, man, just scattered. Signs are knocked down. It's bad. It's not. It's kind of what you would expect from a Category 1 hurricane, to be honest with you. Category 1 / maybe Category 2 type damage. So I decide, okay, let me keep pushing east, even though I'm fully expecting like the beach areas to be closed off by law enforcement. I get over the bridge. I get to the bridge to go over the intercoastal. There's no law enforcement anywhere. It's completely open. So I drive over, and I'm like, this is great. There's nobody around. It's completely abandoned, and I drive in. And so this is where I was in the video when I first drive in over the bridge.
That wind.
Now you can see that I'm kind of like awestruck by the winds that are happening here. And this was a camera that I had strapped on my dash on my shoulder. Now here is the shot from the live broadcast. Again, you notice that shot. There's a light pole that's like bobbing around. It's really bad. Things are moving around. There's pieces of roof blowing off. There's power lines dangling, and at one point I had to drive around one of the dangled power lines to get around it to keep going south. Yeah, that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to go south and get to the areas where my remote cam was set up. So here we go. Continuing on. I'm not sure if that's rainwater flooding or surge.
I think that's surge, bud.
Did you see that light pole bouncing around?
Yeah, I thought it was about ready to go.
Okay, now at this point of the video, I'm getting out of the truck. I'm right near the ocean, an apartment complex, which was completely abandoned, and it all shuttered up, and everybody was gone. So I decided to get out with my HD cam, which is a handheld cam, and the surge. This was all beach out there, but the surge was. Why do I have this window open here? Okay, never mind. But the surge was smashing the seawalls, and this was all beach when I was setting up the remote cam. So here's what I saw with the remote cam. With the handheld cam, rather. And again, while you're watching this, you have to understand the hurricane was directly due east of my location, but the winds were offshore at this point. The winds were blowing from west to east and were blowing offshore behind my back. So this is why I felt safe getting out there, because I knew that the winds were, A, Category 1. You can withstand those, standing in it. And number two, I felt that based on observing the wind as long as I did, that there was not anything that was going to come flying and hit me in the head or anything. So I felt it'd be a good chance to get out there and film this as the surge was receding, and here's the way it went. Okay, so at this point of the video, I decided to drive around on the other side of the parking lot and give the audience a good shot of the ocean. I was right on the ramp that leads down where the lifeguards go, and out of nowhere, here comes this wave. It's pretty amazing how far this water came up underneath my truck, but here it is.
Whoa! Storm surge. Just undermined my truck. And there it goes, back out. Whoa. Storm surge. Just undermined my truck. And there it goes, back out.
So then at this point of the video, I decide, okay, let me get out with my camera and walk around and show the audience the water hitting the seawalls from the ocean, because this was all beach. Again, these were big, wide beaches. And I wanted to show people what the camera looked like that I installed. So I decided to get out and run around, and here it is.
Look how the water's receded. Before it was smashing up against these walls.
Well, you can see where the water line. You can see where the water line was.
That's how high that wall is. It was right up against the top of that wall earlier. This is water. Shit. There is the camera, by the way. There's a shot of it up close.
Looks like it didn't budge at all.
And there is the remote camera shot, by the way, early on in the hurricane. Anyway, that's about all there is to see on that. But that entire video, you can watch it on the video archive page at Hurricane City. There's all kinds of good videos from the past. But that camera did take on a little bit of water, unfortunately. What happened was I had an antenna on it to increase my capacity to be able to get broadband from the remote camera. And what happened was the rain and the wind pushed the water down the line and underneath the housing, and the water got in underneath the housing, believe it or not. And so there was a little bit of water inside the housing, but the camera continued to go through the whole thing. Everything performed flawlessly. So I'm very happy with it. I just have to make some modifications, but I'm really happy with the remote camera, and I will be using it on other chases down the road. So anyway, that's basically what happened. But now things got interesting further up the coast of Florida, because this is where the surge came in on Jacksonville and in Daytona, and there were some areas that were impacted. So let's go back to the maps. And here it is in New Smyrna, and it's leaving the area that I'm in. And there it goes up towards Ormond Beach. Now notice the red fat circle begins to pull away from the coast. And the Marineland area, Flagler Beach, St. Augustine Beach, all get hurricane force winds. Even Jacksonville, it will be considered a hit for Jacksonville, even though the center began to pull away from Jacksonville. And there you see just northeast of Jacksonville. The hurricane force wind field affected them for maybe a couple of hours as it pulled away. And at this point, it was a 110 mile an hour hurricane, category 2, as it was pulling away from North Florida. But a lot of coastal flooding in northeast Florida. I did not go to continue chasing the hurricane because it was going to get up into the southeast and the mid-Atlantic. There was a lot of debate whether it was ever going to make landfall up there. Some of the models had it going east of the coast. None of them had. Some of them had it coming on shore. Some of them didn't. And so I basically just decided to head back south towards South Florida and edit the video and get everything cleaned up and everything. And that was my chase of Hurricane Matthew. Now, if we focus in on the southeast, and that's where things got real interesting and the death toll went up significantly from Hurricane Matthew. And let's go ahead and draw a square around the southeast and kind of give you an idea of what happened with Matthew as it hit the southeast. And again, it made landfall near McClellanville, South Carolina, which is right near Charleston, as a Category 1 hurricane. But at this point, the wind field began to expand, as you can see, and it's like rinsing a large sponge out over a populated area. It just dumped torrents amounts of rain. Also considering the fact that the area had already been impacted by tropical storms Hermine, Julia, and Cullen. But what happened here in Savannah is really amazing. On Tybee Island, they had a record storm surge of 12, let me see here, what was it, 12.5 feet. That's according to the Chatham County Emergency Management Agency, which beat the previous record of 12.2 feet set during Hurricane David in 1979. So this was similar to David for people in Savannah. And then, of course, it affected Hilton Head Island and Beaufort, South Carolina. And then it made landfall right near Charleston. And that took place right there was the point of landfall, actually, the previous position. Maybe it was that position. Yeah, there's your point of landfall. And that was in the morning around 10 a.m., October 8th, right near Charleston, just north of Charleston, with 75-mile-per-hour winds as Matthew began to ride the coast. And this is where all the flooding took place. And combination of surge and rainfall flooding just devastated these areas. And when you go down to, by the way, 3 people were killed down in Georgia, by the way, from this. And then you go to South Carolina, it turned roads into rivers, ripped trees and knocked trees over and inundated ground levels from the 3 previous tropical storms that hit the area. And more than 430,000 people in the state were without power, and it killed 4 people in South Carolina. It could have been a lot worse. We were actually streaming the live feed, and again, you can find this on the video archive page of the coverage from Charleston, South Carolina, as the flooding was piling up in South Carolina and then heading towards North Carolina. And then it, of course, it continued riding the coast, went through Georgetown, Myrtle Beach, all as a Category 1 hurricane. And then it went just southeast of Wilmington. This is where it kind of hooked a hard right-hand turn. And the Hurricane Force Core wind field went south of Wilmington. And so this is considered a brush for Wilmington, not a direct hit from a hurricane, as it hung a hard right-hand turn. And then it moved northeast after this and was a brush for Morehead City and a brush for Cape Hatteras. As the hurricane force wind field, the winds stayed primarily out over the open waters, but the flooding was the huge story from this. All through southeastern North Carolina, inland areas of North Carolina, Charlotte was flooded. Columbia, South Carolina flooded. All these areas were flooded. North Carolina was the hardest hit. 26 people were killed in North Carolina from Hurricane Matthew due to all the flooding that took place. And that happened on October 9th. October 8th and 9th is when the system opened itself up and just dumped torrent amounts of rain over North Carolina. And in Virginia, actually, they had flooding in Virginia as the wind field expanded out. Look at how large that wind field is there using the HurTrack program. It actually expanded out over 240 miles when it got up into North Carolina towards Virginia, and that's why there was so much rain. In fact, the rain in Virginia, I think, was in combination with the same front that kicked Matthew out, and that rain caused heavy flooding in Virginia. One person was killed in Virginia, and there was heavy flooding in southeastern Virginia. So Matthew, again, probably the biggest story of the Atlantic hurricane season. Well, it was the big. It wasn't probably. It was. And, again, that flooding exacerbated by Hermine, Julia, Cullen, and then finally Matthew was more than these areas could handle for flooding and rainfall from the 2016 Atlantic hurricane season. So luckily the season is over for these areas. If they had one more hit up there in South Carolina and North Carolina, I don't think they could handle it. If the hurricane season had extended, let's just say that Otto had developed in the Caribbean and moved north and affected the southeast, they could never have handled that up there. So it's a good thing that the season ended with Matthew. Not that Matthew was a good thing. And again, 46 people killed in the United States. That means probably at least 15 to 20 families had to deal with a death due to this hurricane season. So very, very unhappy people due to this 2016 hurricane season. All right, next on the docket for tonight was Hurricane Nicole. Let's go ahead and pull up Hurricane Nicole on the HurTrack program. What made Nicole so interesting was basically Bermuda is a needle in a haystack in the Atlantic. It's sitting out there in the middle of the Atlantic at around 32 degrees north. And so if we run the animation on this and moved right towards Bermuda, moving basically just east of due north, and the eye passed right over the island. Basic needle in a haystack. What's interesting about Bermuda, 3 out of the past 4 hurricane seasons, they've been hit by a hurricane. Truly astounding, considering it's a, quote, point on a map. But here we go, animating it one more time. The system approaches. We covered this. The archive is available at Hurricane City. I was giving people a tour of the island, showing them the Google Earth shots of all the streets and everything. All right, so here it is, approaching the island, and it makes landfall directly. Well, there is no such thing as landfall in Bermuda because the eye itself was bigger than the entire island, but the island got very close to the center of the eye of Hurricane Nicole as a 120-mile-an-hour hurricane. So this will be considered as a direct hit from a major hurricane hitting Bermuda. This was on October 13th at 11 a.m., so they got hit in broad daylight. There's a lot of cool video out there from Bermuda. Again, one of those videos I showed at the beginning. And again, you can watch this archive. You'll see the video I put together for the beginning of the show. But Hurricane Nicole snapped a lot of trees on the island, peeled off roofs, and flooded homes as it roared across the island. And this happened on a Thursday. The storm also damaged boats that broke away from their moorings and knocked out power to more than 27,000 customers, which is almost half of the island. At one point during the hurricane, the wind grew so strong enough to fling open a hatch on the Weather Service's radar, which knocked the radar offline. I was broadcasting at the time. I remember when that happened. And until they could shut the hatch and get it secured, they didn't get the radar going until the system began to pull away. So for a few hours, they had no radar in Bermuda. But they did a good job. They had a webcam from the Bermuda Weather Service office and the radar shots continuing to come in through the entire storm. However, the Bermuda Harbor Cam and there's like 2 different cameras. There's one of some islands on a bay, and there's another one of a dock, a shipping dock. Both of those cameras went down right when the height of the storm was approaching. So on the live broadcast at Hurricane City, I was basically just showing people Google Earth shots, and I was kind of going over the maps and going over the radar and the images and the stuff from Twitter that I was getting in. That archive, again, if you want to watch the entire thing, it's about maybe 20, 25 minutes long on the archive page at Hurricane City. So finally, we wrap up the season with Otto being the big story. So let's go ahead and pull up Otto as the final big story of the hurricane season. Otto was, the models were all over a potential development in the Western Caribbean Sea. They were kind of indicating for a while there it was going to be up near Jamaica, and then it was going to be up near maybe Haiti. There was thoughts, oh my God, please don't let Haiti get hit again late in the hurricane season. So the models were kind of thinking, well, maybe this is going to be a little bit further south and it's not going to come north, because for a while there the models, both the GFS and the Euro, wanted to take something up near the Cayman Islands and then potentially maybe have something developing maybe up towards Cuba, but there was no indication that it was going to come up near Florida. There was one or two models that were indicating maybe a potential for it to make it into the Bahamas, going just east of Florida for a few days. But once the models settled down, they agreed on a potential development area north of Costa Rica and north of Panama, and that's exactly what happened. Here's the animation as it happened. It developed north of Panama, and it cruised off to the west, and there was a hurricane warning from Bluefield south, and this ended up making landfall in the very, very southern part of the island. And there you see the landfall point. It made landfall at 1 p.m. on November 24th with 110-mile-an-hour winds. Now, there's going to be a reanalysis on this, and there is some indication that this could have been a major hurricane at landfall, but luckily, and again, I was posting it at Hurricane City and on my Twitter feed at Hurricane City, that the population center where this hit was very, very sparsely populated. Only about 1,300 people live right in the area where you see that donut on your screen. Very, very sparsely populated. So nobody was killed in Nicaragua. In fact, it's interesting because if you look at the last few hurricanes that have hit Nicaragua, they've really done rather well dealing with the hurricanes. It's when they get into the western portions of the country where the heavy rainfall occurs in the high population areas where things get a little out of control with death tolls and everything. But the east coast of Nicaragua, they handle these things pretty well. But Bluefields, notice they're 60 nautical miles to the north, has the highest population center on the east coast at 45,000 people, and they were spared. So this wasn't even really a brush for Bluefields, Nicaragua. I mean, if you look at the yellow wind field of tropical storm force winds, never even touched Bluefields, continued to cruise off to the west, and went into the Pacific and kind of wound down in the Pacific. But again, we run it one more time. Could have been a major hurricane right near the Costa Rica-Nicaragua border as it came in. But 9 people were killed in these impact areas, right in this area when it was doing its damage. In this particular point and location, when it was right near Costa Rica, there were 9 people killed. There were a few people in Panama that were killed as well from flooding, and the total was 9 killed in Costa Rica. Several towns were covered by water and mud, and small bridges collapsed. In Panama, 8 people were killed in a mudslide due to heavy rains. So 8 over here and 9 over here in Costa Rica, but nobody was killed in Nicaragua, amazingly. So that's about it. Let's see if I'm missing anything here. Yeah, I didn't have my maps loaded up for Otto, but that's basically it. So if you look at the season as a whole, to me it came down to 5 systems. Earl hitting Belize, Hermine hitting the Big Bend, Florida area, Matthew, of course, the big story with Haiti, East Cuba, the Bahamas, Florida, and the Southeast, Hurricane Nicole in Bermuda, and Hurricane Otto in Nicaragua. 5 hurricanes impacted land this year. Truly amazing. And 75%. I know you'd never know this by looking at a tracking map this season, but even though it looks like a lot of these systems are out in the middle of the ocean, 75% of these named storms this year, out of the 15 storms, 11 of them made landfall or brushed land enough to cause some significant damage. So it was a very, very bad hurricane season for a lot of people. But it could have been a lot worse. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for watching tonight. That's my hurricane season wrap-up show. Just to let you know, I will be doing the database updates and the city rankings during the off-season once the National Hurricane Center finishes with all their post-analysis and all the data gets put together. I'll begin to wrap all that up. And then we'll see you right back here on June 1st. I was mixed for a minute because I got to put my predictions out on May 15th. But my predictions will be out on May 15th, which have been outstanding. Again, check my predictions out if you have any doubts. May 15th, my predictions will be out. June 1st, hurricane season kickoff show right here. And then we'll start it all over again, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for watching, folks. Have a safe off season. Be careful with those fires up there and all the severe weather and everything. I wish the people the best luck with the fires. And pay attention to your weather service office when there's bad weather. And we'll see what happens this winter. Are we going to have any nor'easters, big snowstorms? We'll see. Right now, things have been rather mild so far. We'll see if that continues into January, February. I'm sure we'll have some big storms from the Northeast this year. And then we'll start to focus on hurricane season once again. So for Jim Williams here in Delray Beach, thank you for watching. Good night, everybody.